Hey everyone, my name is Lizzie and today we'll be talking about 5 differences between store-bought alcohol and homemade alcohol. So number 1 is that you know what you put inside your homemade alcohol. As a matter of fact, I just finished a batch today. Here it is, looking pretty as ever, and you see the bubbles. So it hasn't been 24 hours yet, and the yeast is already at work making its alcohol. That's heavy. And I know exactly what I put in it. So I put white sugar, molasses, yeast, water, and that's it. You don't need more to make alcohol. All these fancy ingredients are not necessary. When it comes to a source of sugar, you could put anything. I tell you anything. You could put a banana peel inside your alcohol. You can put anything else that you find in your pantry to give it an extra flavor. Although when you put stuff inside your fermenting jar, just to let you know that when you put it before the fermentation process, all this sugar will be transformed into alcohol. So if you'd like to add flavor, I personally would suggest to add the flavoring after the fermentation is done. This is once the yeast is extracted from the jar, because once you have sugar or flavors, at that moment, there's no more yeast. So nothing is going to eat the sugar to transform it into alcohol. Honestly, if I had to make a nutritional value, you would understand everything that's inside this jar. And alcohol, it's a chemical reaction. It's when yeast eats the sugar and it produces alcohol and CO2. You want to make sure, however, that there's enough water into your wash, because that's what gives a yeast a nice environment to live in. Another difference is the percentage. So it's the alcohol level. If you're someone that likes hard liquor, so something that's above 35, 40% or even 70%, then you might want to go to the liquor store, because you're going to need a still. So you're going to need to get exactly what you do for the fermentation when you get 20% alcohol, plus the distillation process. You can always distill at home. It's just going to cost you a still, which could cost, I've seen some at $300. You can always make a still. If you're a handy person and you want to build a still instead of buying one, you can always transform your beer, cider, mead into hard liquor like rum, vodka, gin. The possibilities are endless, and what the still does is that it purifies your alcohol. I know in a lot of places they don't really care that much if you distill your alcohol, but it's illegal in many parts of the world. So we just want to make sure, if you want to stay within the rules, that the distillation process is legal in your area. The third difference between homemade alcohol and store-bought is the price. So if you're on a budget, go for homemade. You can find anything that you need in your pantry. You probably have sugar, you probably have water. Unless your water stinks, like some places up north have stinky water, so you don't want that. And you probably have yeast. So yeast would be the only thing that you might not have. Worst case, if you don't bake, you can find cheap packs of yeast at the grocery store 5 minutes away. And by sugar, so this is any source of sugar. It could be coming from juice, it could come from grains, it could come from fruits. There's honey, molasses. The possibilities are endless. Now, the fourth difference between alcohol that's homemade or that's store-bought is the time. So if you're in a hurry, honestly, just go to the store and buy some, because once you make alcohol from home, it's going to take you a minimum of 24 hours to be ready. And this is at top speed. So if you get a yeast that's turbo yeast, there's a turbo yeast that's 24 hours, and you want to make sure it's ready, because maybe the yeast won't be done eating all the sugar. The more sugar you put into your alcohol, the more time the yeast takes to eat it all. And it's going to take a longer time for the yeast to be done producing the alcohol. Also, you want to make sure that your jar is in a warm area, because the colder it is, the longer it takes as well for the yeast to be active, because once it's cold, the yeast sink to the bottom of the jar and they just lie there. And talking about the turbo yeast, well, I know a lot of people have had off flavors with this turbo yeast. So if you want something that tastes good, you might want to use another type of yeast. You can use bread yeast, you can use other types of yeast in sachets or in packets. And your fermentation will probably be done in 2 to 4 weeks. However, you can have a fermentation that's done before that if you're in a warm environment, if all the yeast eats all the sugar. So let's say you don't put a lot of sugar into your wash. It's possible. There's not really a minimum amount of time, but people generally leave it at least a week. And the longer you leave it, the more chances the yeast has to eat all the sugar. Another thing that can make your alcohol longer if you make it at home is if something unexpected happens. So let's say if there's mold that appears into your wash, or your equipment breaks, then you might have to buy a new one. So there might be a lot of troubleshooting that you do with your alcohol, especially when you're in the beginning stages. So just be patient, and if you'd rather just get your alcohol and drink, the store is probably a better option for you. However, it's a good learning experience. But I'm just curious, let me know in the comments below if you've made alcohol in the past. What was the quickest time that it took you? Did it take you less than a week? Did it take you 1 week? Were you in a hurry? And I assume that if it didn't take that much time, it's because there was not a lot of sugar added into your jar. And the fifth difference between your alcohol that's store-bought or made at home is that the one made at home can be an activity. So it can be a group activity, you can do this alone. And if you'd like to book a class on alcohol making, there's a link in the description below. You can book a class online or in person, and you'll be able to know step by step all the ingredients that you need, the quantities, and the whole process, how it works. And I'll give you a bonus. So there's a sixth difference between the store-bought and the homemade alcohol is the taste and color. So you might see that the alcohol made at home, it's at your taste. So you can do it exactly to your taste. Flavoring is also a great reason to make alcohol from home because you can adjust it to your taste. I used to do extracts because honestly it's faster. I would just put 2 tablespoons of extract per jar of 750 milliliters. And it would do the trick. The flavors were there, they were noticeable. However, if you put fruits or chopped fruits inside a fermenting jar before it ferments, you're just gonna have a character or an aftertaste. You won't necessarily taste, let's say, the apples or the lemony flavor. The only thing that it can affect is your pH, especially when you add fruits inside your jar because it's more acidic. So you wanna make sure to be careful when adding fruits because if your pH is too acidic, it can prevent your yeast from eating the sugar since the environment is not favorable. So you want to make sure that the pH is roughly around 5.2. Once you add fruits, if you're one of those adventurous ones, I would suggest to chop the fruits in small pieces. That way there's more surface area that can touch the yeast instead of adding like a full-on apple inside the jar. That I believe will have less of an effect on the taste and on the yeast because there's less surface area for the yeast to eat on the sugar. So if you prefer something sweeter, something more sour, more bitter, you can adjust the ingredients for it to fit that criteria. And for the color, if you make a quick batch, usually it'll be a little bit foggy inside the jar. So you want to make sure to clear it out. And this clearing out can take a long time. You might need to cold crash, meaning that you put once you bottle your alcohol, you put it in the fridge. That way all the yeast sinks to the bottom and the top part gets clear. You can also add turbo clear, which is a quicker process to clear. So you just put in the pack inside and your alcohol will clear out. However, if you want to go in the natural way, you're gonna have to play the waiting game, while if you buy the alcohol in the stores, it'll be clear right away. So if you found this video valuable, share it with a friend, and don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.